Hey everyone, welcome to not only another episode, but another season of Sunday School Dropouts.
Yes, it's so good to be back.
It is. It's been a while.
I
I don't remember
know.
when we last recorded, but
Yeah,
this is the beginning of season 3. I
season
can't
three.
believe we've been doing it for 3 seasons now. I
Yeah,
don't know. Time goes by fast
yeah,
as it tends to do.
as it tends to
But
do.
here we
Yeah.
are.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we didn't do any summer episodes, no, vacation Bible school, anything like that. So, yeah, it really does feel like quite some time since we have recorded. But I'm excited because, we kind of left people hanging at the end of season 2, talking about season 3, what we're getting into, which is all things purity culture. And I
hmm
just feel like it's such a timely thing to be talking about at this point, just in the world, in our country, individually, collectively. Purity culture
Yeah.
is needing some conversations around it. So I'm excited for this season.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I recall like other seasons in the past, like we've maybe deep dived like on a
Mhm.
particular episode about purity culture and or
Yeah.
even other subjects, and we'll often be like at the end, we're like, oh wow, we could have like done more than one episode or several episodes
Yes.
on that. So it's exciting that that's kind of what we're doing now.
Yeah.
Season 3 is all things purity culture, and so
Yeah.
I think it's really needed. Gosh, there's like so many angles that you can approach
Mhm.
this thing from, and yeah, it's incredibly important. So and
Yeah.
timely.
And
So
I think I'm so excited and this is maybe a little bit of a tease, but we have so many incredible guests lined up for this season. We're interviewing a lot of professionals. So people that are therapists, coaches in this space, many of whom have also had their own experiences of purity culture. We're talking about purity culture in the Catholic Church, in the Mormon Church. We're talking about purity culture in domestic violence, in purity culture in wellness spaces, how purity culture impacts your body, your sexuality, the LGBTQ community. There's so many different topics that we're hitting. And I'm really excited about it. I think the guests are incredible. We've already gotten to do some interviews, and I'm just really excited for hopefully the resources and information that can come out of this can be really helpful and supportive to people as they're healing from all the areas that purity culture touches. Before we get into the meat of this episode, I wanted to share a couple things that we're doing differently this season that we wanted to invite audience participation on, because as much as we're talking to some really incredible experts and therapists and coaches and people in this field, we also really value not only the questions that everybody has, but also the stories that people have. And so we have a couple ways that we want people to interact with us this season. The first thing is that we want your questions related to all things purity culture. It doesn't just have to be, true love waits, sign your virginity, pledge card, or whatever. It can be purity culture in any sort of context. And if you're wondering what we're talking about, make sure that you stay for this episode because we're going to talk about purity culture even beyond sex and virginity. But we want your questions. We want to be able to have conversations about those in our episodes. And the second way we want people to be able to participate is by sharing your own stories, whether it's about specific things within purity culture, the long or short-term impacts, how it's continued to impact relationships, or anything else you want to share. So if you go to sundayschooldropoutspod.com and click the connect button, you will see a space where you can leave a story, 90 seconds or less. There's some prompts that you can answer or respond to. You can respond more than once. Don't worry, we'll take out all identifying information, so this can be as anonymous as you want it to be. But we would love to hear stories from you. We'll plug those into our episodes. Sometimes we'll comment a little bit on them. Other times we'll just kind of have them in between segments. And like I said, you can also send us your questions. So if you scroll down beneath that, the prompts for being able to record your own story, there's also a question box, and you can submit your questions there, or anytime that we post about it on Instagram. You can also DM the Sunday School Dropouts, whatever you want. The other thing you can do is if you want to send your story written, you can do that in the DMs or through the question box on our website, and we are happy to read that story aloud for you if you would prefer for your voice not to be on the pod. So that was a long-winded way of telling you the ways that you can be involved this season, but we're really excited, and you're going to be hearing some of those stories and those questions even in this episode today.
really excited about that. I think it's going to be great. Before we get into the meat of our episode today, just want to give a quick disclaimer. We recognize that some of the topics we discuss in any episode may bring up feelings, emotions, and triggers that may require more processing or be too much to handle right now. Please always feel free to skip any episode or parts of episodes and come back if and when you are ready. Our goal is to help you trust your own body and lived experience, so take what you need and leave what you don't.
All right, we are going to be answering your questions. So these are questions that we have been compiling all summer in between seasons 2 and 3. And of course, we'll be compiling the rest of the season. There are some really great questions that have come in. And Andrew is going to ask the first one. Of course, we will both be answering.
This first question, yeah, it's a good one. Can I deconstruct purity culture without deconstructing my entire faith?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I have heard that or something to that effect so many times through the years, both just on social media, but also like in the work I do professionally. So it is absolutely something that people are asking, and understandably.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts initially, just hearing that?
So I think ultimately, I think the answer is yes, or potentially. I'll say potentially. I think if you look at how purity culture shows up in your life, I think it is possible that some people would say, you know, hey, I went to a couple True Love Waits rallies, or I did this or that or whatever. I wasn't too impacted by it. You know, I was only in it for a couple years or whatever. And I'm able to kind of set that aside or see the problems within it and find a new sexual ethic or value that works for me. So I want to say that it is possible, but it's probably rare because of the ways that purity culture is so deeply tied into high control religion. And I know when we get into kind of the meat of this episode, we're going to talk about how purity culture expands just outside of, you know, sex before marriage, abstinence, virginity, things like that. But I think when we talk, or when we're talking about how most people understand purity culture, it's so deeply intertwined that it really can, it kind of is like one thing leads to the next, or it's very blurry in terms of where purity culture stops and where your faith, you know, non-purity culture faith begins. So, you know, when we talk about deconstructing, it's so much about, you know, just asking questions, checking to see, why do I believe this? Does this make sense to me? Deconstruction does not necessarily have to be a scary thing, nor does it have to have a specific end goal. But I do think that it's not uncommon for people to start deconstructing one aspect of their faith, that could be purity culture, and they start to see, I end up also deconstructing other parts as well. What do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, so I mean, kind of like what you said, my initial answer to that question, can I theoretically deconstruct purity culture without deconstructing my entire faith? Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes, you can, but there's a lot of it depends in there. And I mean, what I would mean by that is, does it mean, so like if you deconstruct purity culture and no, it's not like a foregone conclusion that you're going to then now be on a slippery slope where 2 years from now you're an atheist. No, you could even still be a Christian. And I think that is absolutely possible. I've seen people do that. What I will say, it just depends because when we say purity culture and how you've lived it, that looks different, a little different for everybody, depending on generation, your cultural, ethnic background, your denominational background, just all of those things. And so it's like, what that means might be something different for everybody. What I will say is, if, for example, purity culture for you means that there's this inherent belief that your body is just wicked, can't be trusted, and is that, can you deconstruct that without deconstructing your entire faith? Like there's going to be some very key pieces of that faith that in other words, if you don't deconstruct that belief that you're inherently flawed, wicked, and cannot trust your own body, then I would be more bold to say, I don't think you can actually deconstruct purity culture if you're not going to also deconstruct that belief. So it just depends how integral that belief is to that particular, whatever faith background you come from. So it really does depend. I do think there are certain things that, if you can't deconstruct that, it's going to be a problem.
No, I think that's really good. It's a great question to be asking, and I can understand why it might feel scary because one thing can so naturally lead to the other. So yeah, great question. Okay, here's another one. I think it's a great one. Is it possible to still value abstinence? So I'm assuming this is like abstinence before marriage without reinforcing purity culture? Is it possible to still value abstinence before marriage without reinforcing purity culture? Ooh, I love this. What do you think? I'm going to you first, Andrew.
I mean, yeah. The short answer again is, yeah, it's possible. Absolutely. I mean, I guess without going too deep into it, I would just say it's absolutely possible. For me, what makes it or doesn't make it purity culture is really the underlying motivation and the underlying belief you have about yourself and your body. The values that you have that is driving that decision.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you what that is. That's a very personal thing that everybody for themselves is going to have to decide. So yeah, is it possible? Sure. But it depends. Like, what's driving it? Why are you doing it?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree. I think that people are allowed to make whatever choices they want to for themselves, and so if that means that they don't want to have any sort of sexual experiences before marriage or before they're engaged or unless or until this or that, like that is totally your choice. But I would just say, make sure that whatever your choice is in alignment with the rest of your values. Are you making this choice because you're afraid of the consequences or eternal conscious torment, or what would happen, if you went against a rule from your parent or your pastor or your church or things like that? And so if you feel, though, that like this is a decision for you that is coming because this is truly what you want and what you feel like is best for you, then personally for me, I think that's great. I think that as a clinician, I would want you to do what you feel like is best for you. And I think too, like a lot of people have this notion that purity culture is just like no sex before marriage. And if that's what all that purity culture was, it's like it would actually be very easy to write off purity culture. I think it's so much more than that. Like the motivations underneath it, the desire for power and control, the desire to strip you of bodily autonomy, like all of that plays into it. No sex before marriage is just one component. And so yeah. So to that end, I do think you can value abstinence so long as that it's coming from your own values and not necessarily the fear of what if or the consequences that somebody else has placed on you. Good questions, y'all. Let's keep them coming.
Purity culture was a big challenge for me as a survivor of sexual abuse as a child. My father gave me a purity ring when I was 12, turning 13. And I always felt like something was really off. It didn't make sense to me. My body was changing. I felt different than my friends. And a big part of it was because of the sexual abuse. So when I got into teenage years and had my first boyfriend and, we were sexual and I had sexual experiences, in some ways they felt empowering to me. And I made the choice to do what I wanted with my body and explore and learn. But then there was this huge cloud of shame. I had to take off the purity ring and hide it from my dad and not let my parents know this decision I made. So in ways that I may have been healing from my sexual trauma, I was kept under this burden of shame due to the purity culture and the standards of being raised in that environment.
I have a thought to that. I really appreciate what that person said. It feels like I really resonate personally, that feeling of empowerment and then the conflictual, like feeling guilt for not feeling guilt, essentially, like guilty for not feeling guilty. I think that it's probably more common. For a long time, I was like, everybody just talks about this immense amount of shame that they felt. But I, too, also felt extremely empowered. And that was very confusing for me. And it was very confusing, too, in the midst of healing from sexualized violence. It really, those teachings together and then contrasting that with like how your body experienced things, I just feel like can really do a lot of psychological damage. So I'm really appreciative for this person sharing that.
Yeah, no, definitely. It does resonate too, just that, because like, especially when there's like a history of abuse of any sort, and there's also just going to be like shame and pain and a mixture of things tied up in that. And so it really can become very convoluted, is the word that comes to mind, when you're not only trying to heal from that and doing things that are, exercising your own autonomy and things that are empowering to yourself, but there's still like that specter of purity culture, like that shame-driven narrative of what you're supposed to do and what it means if you don't do that, or, like if you do have sexual experiences outside of or before marriage, and what that means. And yeah, it's a lot. It really is a lot.
I'm from Germany, and I was raised Mormon. And something we have is a worthy interview where the bishop asks you really detailed questions about your life and your decisions, and also about your sexuality. And the first time I remember when a middle-aged guy was a father of a friend of mine who asked me if I masturbate and stuff like that. And it was really detailed. And I remember I always felt uncomfortable with questions like this and with interviews like this, but there was not really an opportunity to say no. And I just learned that it is normal and okay that there are men who have more power and have the power to say anything to me that I should do, that I have to submit. And I really learned early that it's my biggest goal in life to make my husband happy, to marry and make my husband happy in every way.
Wow. I don't know. Have you worked with any Mormon or former Mormon clients? Or maybe you've heard stories, but I think that's one thing that people out of evangelical purity culture don't experience that people coming out of the LDS church do, is that there were these interviews with the bishops where they had free reign to ask any sort of invasive question, and there was this expectation of answering it. I just really, my heart goes out to this person and to anybody who had to endure that. It's so invasive. It is so controlling. It is shameful and degrading, and it doesn't stop when you walk out of the office. I've spoken with so many people who've had to go through these, and the amount of shame that they carry from those interviews and how much they struggle to be able to have dialogue now about healthy sex and sexuality, or how they view themselves, is deeply impacted by what they had to endure in those interviews. And I'm so sorry for the people that had to go through that.
I've known quite a few former Mormons, or worked with quite a few. And I think evangelicals can sometimes maybe kind of get some stuff like that out of youth group, but it's the formality of it totally different.
Yeah.
The flavor of what the folks in the LDS church go through with those questions. Because for what it's worth, two things that come to mind as I was just listening to that is developmentally speaking, there is nothing wrong or abnormal for someone of that age to be masturbating. What is abnormal and weird is a grown man asking a young person detailed questions about any of that. That is, in literally any other context in the world, anybody would view that as highly inappropriate.
Absolutely.
But it just goes to show how systems and dynamics of power and control have such a significant piece in the discussion around purity culture. So I'm glad we're talking about it.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and get into it. I think definitely have some really good questions I'm looking forward to, just tackling, exploring, whatever, getting into it. So first one I think is pretty important, and that is simply, when we say purity culture, what is it that we're actually talking about? And what also tends to get left out of those definitions? What usually is an important piece that gets left out that, needs to be added?
Yeah. I wish that there was a really succinct definition for purity culture. And then there's also, I'm kind of glad that there isn't. I think it's fair to say when people talk about purity culture, the first thing they think of is abstinence only, wait until you're married to have sex, virginity pledges, true love wait, silver ring thing, talking to bishops, those sorts of things. Yeah. And certainly that is purity culture. But I think it's, at least for me, when I talk to clients and other people, when we're looking at purity culture, we're looking at a culture of purity. And that could be an ideology. It could be a specific body type. It could be a specific way of operating in the world, that there is a standard of purity that is trying to be achieved. I think about that within our culture and different body colors, right? And so I think in Western civilization for sure, but really maybe the whole world, even going back generations, there's this idea that people in white bodies have a greater level of purity that other people, simply because of their body color, may not have. And so they have to conform and contort themselves to try to make themselves as white as possible. I think that is a purity culture. I think we also see elements of sexual purity culture within racism and capitalism and things like that. And so I think that, I know this season we'll be talking a lot about kind of some of the more stereotypical purity culture topics, but I think it's important to recognize that purity culture spans far beyond just like when you have a sexual encounter into all areas that can be controlled in order to reach this identified standard of purity that is defined by somebody outside of yourself. That's kind of how I frame purity culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good definition, and expanding the definition beyond just literal sexuality or sexual acts, I think is incredibly important, because it does go so far beyond that. And the control being somebody outside of yourself making these decisions too, I think that's important because of just the decentering of your own autonomy. Like, I know that's a theme that I see being very important in purity culture, regardless of what facet we are talking about. The other important thing that I notice happening is that in purity culture, we're always approaching the question of like our bodies, ourselves, as not being enough. There always being a deficit. There always being an inherent badness, whatever that means. Like, I mean, that could be everything from, like the Christian idea of like, like the heart is deceitful or the flesh is wicked, or from like a health and wellness perspective of just, there's always like this higher level of health to be achieved. Like, you are not okay where you are at. You are not okay as you are. And that being the message, whether it's explicit or implicit. That is a big thread that I see through all aspects of purity culture.
Yeah. I know we're going to be talking with somebody this season about how purity culture shows up in wellness spaces. And, we kind of joke about it sometimes of like this pipeline from religious fundamentalism into toxic wellness culture. But it's really the same thing. It's this idea that if you follow these rules or standards or principles or align with these values, you will get the reward. And that might be your knight in shining armor husband with out of this world sex, or it could be a toxin-free body, or whatever it might be. But it is this promise for this reward that then invokes so much control over every area of your life that it makes it absolutely impossible, and you lose yourself in the midst of all of it. So for you, because we both grew up in a religious purity culture, I'm curious to know what parts of purity culture didn't necessarily feel, quote unquote, toxic at the time, but looking back clearly were. And you can't say everything, even though that's the right answer. But like, what do you look back and you're like, yeah, this is good. And now you're like, yeah, no.
Yeah, I think probably the ones that the aspect that was most normalized was even just like the idea of like you had to wait till you were married to have sex, and just marriage in general, and just the whole way that was approached and talked about. The whole I think that because at the time growing up, and it didn't feel toxic. It felt, well, yeah, that's just what you do. Like, if you're being responsible, not even godly, just responsible. Like, people who don't do that are being irresponsible and making dumb decisions that, like, that was kind of the take. And I think that's probably the one that jumps out at me the most. I'm sure there's others. But what about you though?
I mean, even as you were talking, I was like, oh, I could say this or that or this or that or whatever. But I think the one that came to mind very first, even when I asked you that question, was just the amount of responsibility that I as a woman had for all of the men around me to remain pure. And not only how seriously I took that responsibility, but also how I really put that on other young women in particular. So I worked with a middle school youth group, and so I had girls that I would work with and, do like mentoring things with, small groups, things like that, where I would teach them, your body has so much power, but that's not a good thing. And I would literally teach them to cover themselves up, to feel ashamed of themselves, to always be like, okay, how could a man see me? How might that make him sin? What do I need to do to mitigate that? and just the enormous amount of responsibility and shame and self-disgust that I carried around, that so many of the girls that I mentored carry around. And I really thought like that that was my job as the quote unquote older woman teaching the quote unquote younger women. That was my job. And now I just see that as extremely toxic, not only to myself, not only to the younger women, but also to the men. I mean, it just teaches so many faulty preconceptions of so many things. And yeah, and it lived on way further than even, coming out of purity culture. I mean, I could reject that belief, but man, it took me years to kind of disembody that need to like cover myself up or wonder, am I making this man feel this way? And have I done something wrong as a result of that? So that's the one that comes to mind first. Like you said, I'm sure I could think of so many more, but that was just, that was really bad. Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, that's a good example. I mean, it's just another example of that. Well, I mean, the theme, that decentering of your own autonomy, because like on one hand, like not only are you being told by somebody else how you should feel and what you should believe about your own body, but now, interestingly enough, you are responsible for somebody else,
right?
Men. So it's like, wait, so I can't even choose my own, be responsible or make my own decisions, but I am somehow still responsible for this whole group of people in the church, men.
Yeah.
It's like mind numbing thinking back on it now.
Yeah. So little power and so much power all in one, like major cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know these examples, of course, are, relating to church specifically, but I am curious, how does purity culture show up in spaces that aren't religious at all, or at least aren't overtly religious at all, like whether that be wellness culture, patriarchy, trauma recovery spaces even.
Yeah. I love this question because I see it happen so much. And the word fundamentalism comes to mind when you ask this, because again, fundamentalism is not limited just to religion. I think I see it in so many other spaces. And when we look at purity culture, which is all about power and control and, people outside of you defining you and this key to living and this puritanical standard. Yeah, I mean, I kind of talked about it already in some wellness spaces, but even in trauma recovery spaces. I mean, I remember years and years ago, there was conversations like, well, in order to be truly deconstructed, you have to deconstruct this and you have to kind of end at this specific place. Or in trauma recovery spaces, you have to do this kind of therapy, or you have to work with this type of practitioner, or you have to, be fully healed before you can do X, Y, or Z. Or, if you're triggered at all, it means that all the work you've done doesn't matter, or that other people are responsible for making sure that you're okay and keeping your boundaries. So I see it pop up, and it's really, I think, any space where we're outsourcing our own autonomy, where we're outsourcing our, what we might call like a locus of control, and saying somebody else is responsible for that in order for me to be okay, or to be good, or to be right. And so, I see it showing up all over. I feel like that unto itself could be a whole episode, but I'll get off my soapbox there. What do you think, Andrew?
I was thinking some ways that I've seen it, like in spaces that are not necessarily religious. I mean, so my backstory is, of course, I've grown up in the South. I began working as a therapist in the South. That's where my first job was ever. And that's where it became just so abundantly obvious that like crisis pregnancy centers are all, even the ones that aren't maybe religious, they are guided by purity culture. Like there is a best practice way, or according to them, to handle that. And it is never getting an abortion. There are with the exception of Planned Parenthood itself specifically, I don't think any other of those nonprofits were in favor of that option ever. Like that was not, well, it wasn't an option, really. I mean, it was, but they wouldn't volunteer it to let anyone know about it. And I didn't realize to what extent that was a thing until I was a therapist working in those communities, and then just realizing it's like, oh, it's not a church, but you sure are guided by their sexual ethic and what it means to, how you are supposed to deal with a pregnancy, even if you don't want it, or if it happens out of wedlock. And, it's just, there's so much that was guided by purity culture. And I didn't have the language for it at the time, but I did know it felt kind of gross. I'm like, this is like the church, but it's not the church.
Yeah. As somebody who grew up in the North, moved to the South, and have adult years of experience in both cultures, I can really validate what you just said in terms of purity culture ideals being baked into a Southern culture. And that's not to suggest that, East, West, North, whatever, like it isn't, but it is different in the South. And I'll often hear people in the South say, oh, well, we don't talk about politics. We don't talk about religion. When we just stay silent. I'm like, oh, no, no, no. It is so baked into your culture and into your language and into your experiences that you talk about it all the time without even knowing that that's what you're talking about because it's so deeply embedded.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, just the ability to have the privilege to say that we're not political and we don't talk about religion is such a political and religious statement because it tells me that there's such uniformity amongst you culturally speaking. Yeah, you don't have to talk about it because for the most part, you know that 95% of the people around you are the same thing as you. And that's just coming from an immense place of privilege, really.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So going back to the personal a little bit, I know we talked about kind of some of the toxic things, but what do you feel like would be a message from purity culture that stuck with you? Even if you didn't realize it until years later, and maybe even specifically in relationships, whether that's romantic, platonic, or the relationship that you have with yourself. Yeah, just curious to know some of the long-term impacts.
I think probably the one that is most significant, that I've noticed the most throughout the years is probably just, it's really just the idea that my body is good, that it's not flawed, broken, whatever, like, and how that ties into, sexuality and relationships. Like that was such a thing that I know that I definitely carried out of my growing up, also into like my first marriage many years ago. And and even after that marriage, that it ended several years ago. But even after that, like I know definitely was going to therapy for stuff relating to that. And like that's, I think, just the idea that it's okay to seek pleasure, to want to do things, to seek out a relationship or leave a relationship simply because I wasn't happy. Like that's a valid reason to leave something, not being happy, for example. And so that is so like counter to everything that I was taught.
Yes.
So I mean that being the theme, like not, like it obviously applies to so many different angles, I think, of my life, but that's purity culture, relationship, sexuality. I've definitely seen it show up there a lot. And it's getting better, but it's definitely stuck around for many years.
Yeah. Yeah. I can echo that. And even as you were saying it, I think that one of the things that really stuck with me that I was not even super aware of until probably within the last 5 years or whatever is this idea that as a woman, sex is not for me. Like my experience of it doesn't matter, including if I am in pain. And that was really brought to light a few years ago as I had huge fibroids in my uterus that actually made sex painful. And it had made it painful for a whole decade before that. But I just didn't recognize that, like, that not only did pain need to be a part of that experience, but I just equated like, well, this isn't really for me anyways. My pleasure doesn't matter. My pain levels don't matter. And I've worked with so many other women who share that as well, where they are actually experiencing extremely painful sexual experiences. But because of that message that like sex is not for you or your pleasure or desire as a woman, that there's not even like language to speak about that or to know that this is a problem. Like you can tell when your body's in pain, even if you only had sex with one person, like your body still knows when you're in pain. And so I think that was something that was really shocking. And I remember when I kind of like all the pieces came together, I was just so angry and I had to go to rage walk because I was so angry. I had so much energy running through me to recognize that I had spent at that point, almost 40 years of my life believing this and having to live out of the literal impacts of that belief. Yeah. So it's a lot.
I think this ties into what we were just talking about here, but is there a moment when you really realized that you were still carrying purity culture, specifically in your nervous system?
Yeah.
Like even after you had deconstructed, so even after you have clearly done a lot of work, but then we're realizing, oh, there's still a lot of this that is I'm still carrying with me, kind of in an embodied sense.
Yeah. Okay. So I think just like the role I was supposed to take as a woman in terms of how relationships develop. I've always had a stronger personality. It was something I got in trouble for quite frequently while I was in the church, capital C church, because this was multiple churches. I'm also somebody that I grew up with brothers. And so relating to men is not difficult for me. And so that was often my personality plus knowing how to relate to men was something that was seen as very much outside of the role of what a woman should do or, how they should interact or things like that. And so I think then what it ultimately led to was feeling very, very scared anytime I interacted with a man, even long after purity culture was kind of like not a part of my cognitive thinking. But I was constantly in that, kind of activated space. Had I said the right thing? Had I led that person on? Had I been too bold? Was it okay for me to make a first move to, those sorts of things? And I would just get very activated in any of those things so much that it would impact the person in front of me. It would leave a lot of like awkwardness or discomfort or them wondering like, what is wrong with you? But yeah, I think that I really had to tackle that and like learn how to notice what was happening in my body when I was approaching some of those circumstances and really kind of challenge myself to have uncomfortable experiences, just even like initiating conversations. That's why Bumble was really, really actually quite helpful because the woman had to make the first move. Bumble, if you want to, do ads for this podcast and, help us purity culture people, we will totally do that. Support our podcast. No, but Bumble was actually really helpful because the women had to make the first move. So it was like this practicing ground of like having to navigate that nervous system response in a safe and titrated way. So yeah, that kind of comes to mind. But what about you?
There's so many ways, but I think one way it's interesting. This actually kind of piggybacks off of a little bit of what you said, and just like some of like those conversations that, like with men specifically, that would be kind of awkward. And honestly, kind of a similar thing for me, I think, because I grew up Adventist, so we didn't use this term for it, but the whole Billy Graham rule, like, the whole man and a woman not being alone together, to be above the appearance of evil, even if nothing was, happening. Just don't even give an opportunity for it to even appear that way. And I was always my personality always was very introverted and people pleaser and just all the things. Like in a lot of ways, even as a little kid, and I was never like this stereotypical version of like this obnoxious frat boy kind of guy. Like I never went through that stage. I never did that resonate with me ever. All of that to say though, once I was like out of the church, I'm just, honestly, it was a thing where I think there was just a lot of conversations like with women where it was awkward, but it didn't need to be because I was almost like, oh shit, I don't want them to feel either unsafe or uncomfortable or whatever. So I was just like very hyper aware of like everything from my posture, my body language, what I was doing. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think where it really came to a head and I noticed it the most was probably just when I started grad school because I was going for, my master's in clinical mental health counseling. And as anybody in the field knows, all types of therapy, it's a field dominated by women for the most part. So yeah, I was like, I think I was only one other guy graduated in my cohort. I know that.
Wow.
So,
yeah.
And the rest was women. So, that just gives you the ratios right there.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then all my professors, with the exception of 2 out of probably 10 or 12 different professors I worked with, were all women as well. And so I think that's where I first really noticed it and just realized how, dang, this is interesting. Like I haven't had the practice of just it being okay. It's not a big deal. Like just, you're just people. Like it's okay. But realizing how so much of that was tagging along from how I'd been conditioned growing up.
Absolutely. I remember this story. So I have a couple friend of mine, husband and wife, and we did a lot of deconstructing together. And this was several years ago now. I get a text from the husband and he was like, hey, my wife is going to be out of town this week or whatever. Do you want to go grab dinner on such and such night? And I remember going, oh my gosh, I need to text her and be like, hey, is this okay? Like, I just want to make sure that you're aware that he's doing, and that I like reined myself back in. I was like, no, I trust that if he's asking me to go out to dinner, like he and his wife have talked about this is totally fine. And we got to dinner, had a lovely time. And we were laughing because he grew up in purity culture also. And I was like, isn't it crazy that we didn't just want to rip each other's clothes off just because, it's the two of us together and you're a married man and I'm clearly going to tempt you. And it was very funny, but like one of those moments where you like literally see the absurdity of the Billy Graham rule or something like that.
Just like that autopilot response.
Right.
Like you don't even
Yeah.
You don't even think about it. And then like there you are living it like, oh, damn, I'm doing that thing.
Yeah. So, okay, speaking of cringe moments or moments that make you laugh, I have another one that I thought of, but do you have a story or moment from your own kind of like healing journey or just your time in purity culture that makes you laugh or cringe? Because I've got a doozy for you.
I've got a good one. I've got a good one. Yeah, I mean, so I guess a little bit of backstory. I've always liked writing. I've always been a writer. That's, the first time I was ever published, like that I actually got paid for writing was with the big Adventist flagship journal, the Adventist Review. I've been published like 6 or 7 times. I don't remember. It's been over a decade ago at this point. So anyway, like writing is the thing that I do and care about. All of that to say, this is the thing. This is back in my days of, again, purity culture, believing that I was a sex addict and all of these other things. I literally wrote a whole damn manuscript about how to overcome pornography addiction.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh.
Well, I say a whole manuscript. Probably about 75% of one, but it did a proposal, the whole thing. Yeah, I was actually in talks with one of the Adventist publishing houses about getting it published. Long story short, obviously it was, I don't have it. I couldn't go back to look at it now. So I don't know. It probably was crap for more reasons than one, not just because of the subject matter.
Yeah.
But no, I kind of went back and forth with one of their editors a little bit. Like they were interested kind of, but like, anyway, but it's one of those things where I'm glad that was published. I would hate for that to be the first book I ever published, be that garbage.
Yes.
But
that's so funny. Yeah.
That was mine. I'm sure I have a few others, but I think that's the most cringe of all of them.
Well, I had writing aspirations too, so I can really identify with that. But knowing that this question was coming, I brought a prop. So if you're listening to this just audio only, I'd encourage you to go to our YouTube channel and watch. But this is what's called the VLC Handbook. VLC stands for Virgin Lip Club. And so this was all of us who we're waiting until we were engaged or married to even kiss somebody. And we have lots of, like our mission statement. It's our goal to stay emotionally and physically pure until that one special someone enters our life and sweeps us off our feet. I could go on. I won't read all of it to you. But we had like our VLC membership cards. On the back of this is the wedding dress that I thought I wanted. And you know what? I'm not mad at it. Like it was okay. It's classic, But then, there's also lots of stuff in here. This is my favorite. This is my shopping list for him. So these are all the qualities that I thought that I wanted. And to go a step further, I put scripture to back up each one of these qualities that I thought I needed in a future husband. So, God must be his number one priority, as evidenced by Matthew 6:19 and Matthew 13:45 and 46. Treats me like a princess. 1 Peter 3:7-8, Philippians 2:3, and Proverbs 31 verses 28 and 29. So I was all in. I was so proud because I only had like two physical qualities that I was looking for, and my friends had like so many, and one of them was easily remediable. Apparently, I wanted no back or chest hair, but that can be fixed. Yeah. Yeah. And then the rest of the book is, poems and songs. And and so not only was I in this, but this was definitely something that we would encourage people to join us. And it's cringe. I'm not going to lie. It is cringe. I would say I'm not proud of it, but I also kind of am, so yeah, that's my cringe moment.
No, I love that. Wow.
I was all in. I was purity culture poster child.
Oh gosh. That just takes me back. Not that as a guy growing up in that culture, we didn't do that so much, but no, it just takes me back to just I don't know, youth group conversations,
Right?
young adult classes and such. And oh
Yeah.
man,
Yeah. I
so
mean,
much. Wow.
I really believed it. I didn't have my first kiss until I was like 2 months shy of 30 years old. So I was in that Virgin Lips Club for quite some time. Big card carrying member over here.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, literally, not even just the expression. You literally had a card. That's
I
impressive.
literally had a card. Yeah. I love it. I
Yeah.
love it.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I feel like there's probably so many other stories we could think of
Yes.
if we.
Yeah.
And to be fair, I mean, we're talking about the subject matter for a while, so I'm sure more of these stories will come out as we go
Absolutely.
along.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it would also, I think, be good to talk about a little bit, just kind of like from a clinical lens,
Yeah.
kind of the way some of these things show up. I mean, we touched on that a little bit,
Yeah.
but yeah, I'm just curious, what kind of symptoms, like emotional, relational, sexual, spiritual, what kind of symptoms often lead people to seek support, but without them realizing that it's necessarily tied to purity culture? I'm
Yeah.
curious what you see in that.
I think I probably said this on the podcast before. I feel like at least at the Center for Trauma Resolution and Recovery, obviously we specialize in this, but there's, I would say probably over 90% of our clients, of course, this is anecdotal, are coming in either specifically for purity culture reasons or related to purity culture, or they figure out quickly into the first couple of sessions, like, oh, purity culture really has had an impact on me. And so, I think that the one that came to mind first is kind of a little bit off of what I said earlier, is the sexual pain piece. I did a support group a couple years ago, and I had like an intake form that they filled out because I really wanted the group to be focusing on what they felt was important. And I think we had like 8 to 10 people in the group, and every single person had dealt with sexual pain. And at the time, they were like loosely aware of how it may connect to purity culture, but they really felt like they were the only person. And so to have this group of women where everybody had experienced levels of sexual pain directly related to purity culture, whether that was through, diagnosed things like vaginismus or other sexual disorders, or just their own experiences. And then with that, there's so much shame. There's so much confusion, self-disgust, lacking self-compassion, a real fear of their body, fear of pleasure, feeling like they are disconnected from themselves, from their partners, a lot of anger around the things that they were taught and why that still is living in their bodies, even if they consciously or cognitively no longer believe it. And so I think that even though they might know a sliver of like, yeah, this might be related to purity culture, I think as they start to unpack it, realizing the gravity of how it is related to purity culture and how it is so much more than just no sex before marriage and how that lives in their bodies is something that I see really, really consistently. And even in clients, again, that aren't starting necessarily for trauma related to religion or purity culture, but somehow, especially because of living in the South, it gets tied in. That's the one the big one that comes to mind for me. But you work with clients too. So what kind of comes up in your sessions?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of similar things, honestly. I can definitely speak more from like the male side of things,
Yeah.
in that I definitely have male clients who seek me out because I'm a male clinician, and there's not as many male clinicians usually in the world of master's level therapists and coaches. But yeah, usually the things that, maybe they don't realize are tied to purity culture, but are usually still tied to purity culture, usually has to do with sometimes it's pornography, sometimes or something in that realm, or something in the realm of maybe it is like, kind of like your depression, anxiety, self-esteem type stuff. And then when you really get digging into it, it comes back to stuff with purity culture. So I'll give it for instance, like just because this is how I've seen purity culture, very like some of the narratives that we were given, how it directly affects men, for example. And that is just like on the one side for women, I feel like a lot of the programming is, well, like you said, sex isn't really for women in purity culture. That the narrative, that's often how that's portrayed, even if it's not explicitly said, although sometimes it is explicitly said that way. But what is also oftentimes told to men is that, if you're being a godly man, you're doing everything that you're supposed to be doing, assuming that you're doing that.
Yeah.
Your wife will inevitably want to have sex with you all the time. You'll have an amazing sex life. So a guy who's like, really striving to do everything that he thinks she's supposed to be doing, whatever that is. And then that other thing doesn't happen, it's not even that he's necessarily mad that he's not having sex. It's about the meaning. It's that you're fucking something up. You're not doing enough.
Yeah.
Like there's something you need to be striving harder at, or something that you've not brought to God, the Holy Spirit trying to show you something. So there's a lot of moral failure woven into it that I do see come from purity culture. And so long story short, that's how I see it come out, specifically in men, because I do think in a lot of ways it overtly harms women more in a more pronounced way, but it surely does affect men too, even though paradoxically men are also the ones who I think oftentimes created a lot of these dynamics, but it does also create harmful narratives that affect men as well.
Yeah. In that same vein, and maybe this is, it's like this weird benefit that we get from working with people. But as you've watched other people, whether that's clients or people in your own sphere of connections, heal and recover from purity culture, what are the things that you've learned, or the things that, you've been taught about your own healing?
This sounds almost cliche, or I don't know, but I mean, just that it's possible. I think that's just what's so cool. It's like, it's really, I think in some ways there is almost like this level of like vicarious healing through, as a clinician, being able to see other people like really be making strides and overcoming some of this shame and these narratives and these things that have held like really like a vice grip on their life for so many years and even decades. And so, I think so. It's like, I think, again, it's just really, I think, inspiring, empowering maybe. Yeah. I think that's really probably my takeaway from a lot of it.
I think I echo that in the sense that, obviously we have the privilege of working with many different clients. So we're hearing a lot of stories. We can't always share those stories with other clients, but I love being able to say like, hey, you're actually the 5th client today that has shared this with me. And I say that because it means you're not alone. But also it's really helpful for me to remember that too. When I started deconstructing, social media didn't exist. I mean, we didn't have language like we have today. I mean, we're talking back in like, 2007, 8, not, whatever. And I remember when Diana Anderson's book called Damaged Goods came out, and it was all about purity culture. It was the first time I'd heard it called purity culture. This was back in 2015, so 10 years ago. And just like the immense amount of pressure that was relieved by knowing that there is language, I am not alone, these impacts that I have felt that I've struggled to organize and put words around, somebody is talking about them in a book. I mean, I think I've read the book at least 10 times because it was just that powerful. But I think then that is affirmed, usually on a daily basis, that like it really is that bad. I'm not making it up. It's okay. It doesn't mean there's something wrong or broken within me, that I'm not over it. This is something that has deeply impacted me on every level. And I think that gives me the courage to continue to keep taking steps forward, and then the ability to also give that to my clients.
Absolutely. Well, this next question, I mean, on some level, I feel like some of the answer to this might almost is self-evident with everything we've already said.
Sure.
But I want to specifically talk about it. Why is it so important for clinicians, coaches, advocates, to understand purity culture, regardless of their client's faith background?
I think the way that we're talking about it in terms of like ascribing to this puritanical standard, whatever that is, I think it's so beneficial for helpers, we'll just say, to know about it, because it impacts every area of life. And we're seeing it not just in religious context, we're seeing it in social context, in political context, in social media, recovery spaces, all of these things. And I think if we're, as clinicians or coaches or advocates, if we're not aware of kind of how this culture lives within people, we're only treating symptoms. We're not getting to the root of what is going on. We're not going to the way that fundamentalism can live inside of somebody's body. I call it embodied fundamentalism. And I think then if we don't understand that and we're just treating symptoms, then the likelihood that that person is going to go from one fundamentalist or purity culture system to another and recreate those cycles of harm and control and power and things like that, it just increases exponentially. So yeah, I mean, this I feel like is also a whole other episode that we could do, but that's like my just very high level answer that I would give. I know, we were talking offline that this is a conversation that you've been having recently with other clinicians. So I am curious to hear what your thoughts are of why it is so important.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so important because at least in Western culture, American culture, especially in the South, I think it's just the air we breathe.
Yeah.
I mean, to have what I mean by that is you're not necessarily going to be like overtly talking about sex. There's going to be so many like undercurrents and things that are just assumed and taken for granted in culture and cultural expectations, and that ties back to purity culture. It all ties back to the same thing. So even being able to understand that dynamic in that culture and how it affects so many different things, and that's why I think it's important for helpers, whatever type of helper you are. It's so important to recognize that because, I mean, if you're trying to help somebody recover from sexual shame, for example, but you don't know a significant amount of ways how that might show up in ways other than just sex itself, like it's going to be limited in how much help you can actually offer.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay, so on that note, I mean, I know we've talked a little bit in this conversation about purity culture as a system of control. So I wonder if we can just kind of, as we start to wrap up, talk about what does it take to begin dismantling this system of control really from the inside out, which I know is a huge question, and we might not even be able to answer it in an entire season worth of episodes. But I would be curious to hear what your thoughts are.
I think the biggest thing, two things, is that it's so much more than just sex and sexuality. First of all, secondly, the other big piece is like looking at themes here, and that is that it's about, I think, bodily autonomy, and specifically what I mean and how that plays out is who gets to decide what you get to do with your body, and who knows what is best for your body. And those are questions that in purity culture, the answer to either of those questions, it's not you. And so that's problematic. And so I think even just recognizing that is a good place to start, honestly, because I mean, you can't really work to fix a problem until you can recognize what the problem is.
Totally. Yeah. Building off of that, when I thought of this question, I immediately went to like, it has to start individually. Like I am all about some collective change here. I believe we need that. But I think until we understand purity culture and particularly how fundamentalism is embodied, it's going to be very hard to dismantle a system of control. Because what purity culture and embodied fundamentalism wants is conformity. And they want everybody to conform to this very specific standard. And anybody who doesn't is seen as an other or an outcast or an us versus them, right? They're on the outside. And it's not until we can disembody fundamentalism as an individual and then let that span outwards that allows other humans to show up as themselves. And then we can actually start to challenge these systems of control. Because if I'm just switching from one fundamentalist system to another fundamentalist system, I'm still requiring everybody to abide by my standards in order to be okay or good. And I think when we start to learn how to regulate our own nervous systems and find internal safety and disembody fundamentalism, that then spans outward to how we can let other people show up and say, you don't have to believe or be just like me in order to be okay, but we can do that. We can coexist together and we can go after XYZ cause or, advocate for this or whatnot. And perhaps that's a bigger conversation, but I think that in order to have greater change, we need more people that have open arms. And the only way we can do that is by doing our own work individually. Yeah, that's kind of what I think about that question.
Yeah. In your experience, what does it feel like somatically to start letting go of purity culture's grip, and what shows up in the body?
Yeah, I'm kind of on this rant from the last question, but I think about, for me, purity culture somatically has like a bracing posture, whether it's bracing for punishment or, retribution or being, told that you're not doing something the right way. And that's very hard to show up as yourself. It's very hard to, quote unquote, let go when we're in that space. When I think about disembodying fundamentalism and embracing more of a liberatory kind of posture, there is like this spaciousness. And if you're watching on the YouTube video, you can see like I went from a braced kind of shoulders up posture to kind of a more relaxed arms open, even as I'm kind of imagining being in each of those states. And that's a somatic shift that I've just kind of gone through there without really even having to think about it, but it just shows up, right? And so when I think about that open posture, that doesn't mean that you can't get triggered. It doesn't mean that things are always going to go okay, but it means that there's just an okayness with the present moment. And so I feel like that is what it starts to feel like somatically. Letting go is going like, I don't need everybody to be on my side, or I don't need to be braced and ready for danger at all times. I can, be in the present moment. And I think it also somatically shows up in noticing when you feel activated, when somebody's doing something that is not within your kind of value system, or maybe even totally against you or totally against what you believe, and noticing what shows up. Am I demanding that they adopt what I am thinking and feeling and valuing, or am I leaving space for them to show up as themselves, not without consequence, and not suggesting that you have to be best friends with everybody, but just this recognition that, purity culture is about that need to ascribe to a pre-identified standard of purity. And that allows, there's spaciousness in that. So I don't know. What about you?
Somatically, specifically, it's very similar to what you described. I think what I've noticed is like very specifically is like a tightness kind of somewhere between my heart and the top of my stomach. So I guess, what is that, your solar plexus or something?
Yeah.
That region, like there's the absence of tightness there. So looseness, expansiveness, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with you. Like, it's not to say that you never get triggered, you never have things show up that are distressing. That's not the point. But my baseline place of operating is that now. And I do notice the difference. Like, it's just, there's not this weightiness of whether it's dread or shame or just always feeling like there was something more that I should be doing or needed to be doing to be good. Yeah. That is mostly gone now, like almost entirely, compared to where I was like 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, that's incredible. Well, as we wrap up this conversation, I'm going to put this on you first, Andrew. What is your hope for the season, for listeners or for yourself, or this broader conversation? What do you hope this season will bring?
People just being more in touch with and feeling safe in their own bodies. Because I feel like so often in deconstruction land, if I can call it that, all things that pertain to deconstruction land, it's deconstruction is such a cognitive exercise. I think a lot of times we talk about these intellectual ideas, and while those are important, I mean, so much of purity culture and healing embodied trauma or whatever the case may be is like so much of that. It's not a net cognitive exercise. It's embodied. It's somatic. That's what it is. And so just helping people be able to actually connect with that, because you can cognitively know something and even believe it on a rational level, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's congruent with what you're feeling in your nervous system.
Yeah, I think I would say the same, to whether it's an introduction to your body or a deeper relationship, the recognition of how purity culture can be embodied and how to resolve that. But it all comes back to the body, right? And I think that was one of the things when we started this podcast. Our hope was that we would tackle subjects that go beneath just the cognitive pieces and go into a more embodied healing. And so I hope that this season can also be a reflection of that. And that maybe too, especially as people's stories are being featured and we're hearing questions, I also hope that people can feel less alone and that they can feel like they're not isolated in their journey. It's not something that's wrong with them. It's the system, and that there is hope for healing and it is possible. So I think those are the things that I hope for this season.
Yeah. No, that's great.
Awesome.
I'm here for it.
Yeah, me too. All right. One last question, putting you on the spot. If you needed a go-to resource for something purity culture related, what would you suggest?
Well, it depends it depends what angle, but gosh, I mean,
Yeah.
because so many things tie into purity culture. Actually, I think what I would really, one of my go-to resources lately for embodied trauma healing is actually my grandmother's hands, the book.
So good.
I even recommend that over, it used to be Body Keeps the Score, which I still think is useful, but truly, I think my grandmother's hands.
Yeah.
That's, if I had to choose just one resource, it would be that one.
Yes. I would echo that. Such a wonderful book by Resmaa Menakem. We'll make sure to put that in the show notes. I mentioned this book earlier. It is a book by Diana E. Anderson called Damaged Goods. I believe they have changed their name since this point, but I believe the book is still published under Diana E. Anderson. And yeah, it was one of the first purity culture resources out there, naming it, calling out the concepts. And I'm not sure where the author is in their faith journey now, but proposed a liberatory theology, which was brand new for me at the time, but something that was extremely influential in multiple aspects of deconstruction. And yeah, just really appreciated the work that they did. So we'll make sure to put that in the show notes as well. I'm excited for this season.
Awesome.
We've got some incredible guests coming up, and it's going to be a great ride.
Yeah, no, it'll be great. I'm really looking forward to it.
Awesome. All right. Well, with that, I think we can say all God's people said, Amen.
Amen.